manage the Kiev regime, leaving people in Ukraine without democratic rights or freedoms. Zelensky and his clique of anti-church inquisitors, this community, so to say, they violate the religious freedoms in Ukraine. They strip Ukraine of the spiritual independence. They came up with this term as well to destroy this major religion in Ukraine with a shameful silence from the relevant international structures and majority of Western advocates of human rights. They resorted to another act of impunity to behead the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They understand that it could be dangerous. On July the 2nd, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine terminated the contract with the Ombudsman on protection of the state language Taras Kremen. He said that he was willing to fulfill his duties, but he became such a notorious figure even for the modern Ukraine that the MPs of Ukraine dismissed him. Over the 5 years that he worked on this post, he gained a reputation of an ardent opponent of the Russian language. He supported the ban of speaking Russian during the breaks at schools, supported the cancellation of the studying of the Russian language, called on to get rid of the Russian titles of the populated areas in the countries, and he said, I quote, "Ukraine is only for Ukrainians." By and large, he promoted openly neo-Nazi mottos. The number of school children who studied Russian went down by almost 600 times, from 455,000 to 768 people. The parents understand what this means. This means repressions. He is proud of complaints and reports on the violation of the language legislation. According to him, since the beginning of 2025, more than 1,000 complaints were filed. It's something like a fairy tale, but it is the modern Ukraine. The majority of the complaints took place in Kiev, 582, the Odessa, 178, the Kharkov, 171, Dnipropetrovsk, 138, and Kiev, 54 regions.
They're proud of it. Despite the efforts of the Sprachenführer, the people do not rush to start speaking Ukrainian. They continue to speak Russian. And the efforts to separate the residents of Ukraine into the right and the wrong ones, as he said it, on the basis of the language, does not contribute to the protection of the state language, but directly violates the Ukrainian constitution that says that there is a ban on discrimination. And it guarantees the protection of the Russian language that they have not annulled it yet. It just splits this society, encourages people to spy and to inform on each other, to hate each other. The media says that this inquisitor will be supplanted by actor and film producer Mr. Zavarsky, who was against forceful Ukrainization of the country. He said that one should not impose the language, one should create motivation to learn the language. Well, he sounds like a decent, adequate person, but do not be deceived. In the political establishment, it is often the case when the person does not hold an official post, but then when he comes to this post, he starts voicing non-sound judgments. Remember, when Zelensky was running for the president, he was also saying that one should one should not care about the Russian language, let people speak it, but then he promised to revise the language legislation. But then other legislation bills were adopted, including the bill on the complete secondary general education, on indigenous peoples, on national minorities or communities of Ukraine, on preschool education that codify the discrimination of the Russian language. So one should not harbor hopes that the marginalized position that Russian and Russian-speaking population found themselves in, that this will change. One should not harbor hopes for that. Now, on the alliance, or as they call it, unity, solidarity. On July 2nd, Polish President Andrzej Duda, that is going to leave the office, signed a law that designates July 11th the Day of Memory of the Poles, dedicated to victims of genocide by Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and Ukrainian Insurgent Army. Let me remind you that these structures have been designated as extremist ones, and they are prohibited in the Russian Federation. We're talking about the crimes against Poles during the Second Polish Republic. Kiev rushed to call this step as a stab in the back, but they refused to acknowledge the evidence. Not everyone is ready to put up with the Ukrainian nationalism that is on the rise. In vain, well, the consequences for the junta can be way worse. Warsaw is decisive and ready to block the participation of Ukraine in NATO and the European Union before Bankova can settle this sensitive issue of the massacres of the Poles in Volhynia. The elected president, Karol Nawrocki, has made it clear. Amid this, it is symbolic that we saw media reports on July 2nd about neutralization of a gang of Ukrainians that abducted illegal immigrants and extorted money under threats of murder and organ trafficking. Well, it seems like Poles would not want to wait until they become victims of Ukrainians that they themselves cultivated. We saw a significant decrease of Poles that want to see Ukraine in the European Union. June survey counted them at 35%, and 2 years ago it was 85%. Well, see, this is almost a 2.5-fold increase. So less and decrease. And so less and less people want to see Ukraine in European structures. Azov Brigade has been designated terroristic, and is banned. The neo-Nazi ideology and propaganda of total militarization has been propagated. So Germany has been paid attention to that. Concern has been voiced on July 5th by German media Junge Welt. It is noted that Ukraine does not have any fields or sectors that are free from influence of Azov. Well, neo-Nazis conduct military feasts and concerts in the children's camp Azovets. They educate children to handle guns, and their youth organization Centuria instills minors with the mentality, with the emphasis on learning nationalist movement of Ukraine's. Know all about it. We see overwhelming presence of Azov insignia in the metro stations of Kiev as well, when toys are bought. Remember, Alexander Alferov is a big fan of Hitler, was put to the post of the head of Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. It is a phenomenal, and I quote it, phenomenal triumph of neo-Nazi movement. I think that wasn't just used for the sake of it, but this is a citation, a quote from a deep past. I'd like to add that from time to time we see videos on the net where Banderite oath ceremonies are being given. These are young participants of Ukrainian Hitlerjugend that are taking place in this. The whole West should stand accused of willful neglect of Azov and similar neo-Nazi units within the AFU. They should stand accused of financing the Kiev regime that has completely been filled with this ideology and is propagated this ideology. So who receives help in Ukraine? From whom? From Germany, for example, who uses the money of their own taxpayers. The answer is evident. They're helping contemporary Nazis whose ideological forebears were hanged according to the verdict of the Nuremberg tribunals. The aforementioned facts are just another example that special military operation is relevant. The operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, and the goals of this operation will be accomplished as per the leadership of Russia. Another topic that is connected to Ukraine, at the same time, it is connected to the topic of international organizations that should do something to prevent this dehumanization practices that is taking place on Ukrainian soil and to prevent it from taking bigger shape. Paris, July 6th to 15th, UNESCO World Heritage Committee. They will look at 3 properties from the World Heritage List. In 2023, they were inscribed in the list of objects under threat. What are we talking about? We're talking about the following properties: Kiev and related monastic buildings, Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, Lvov, the ensemble of the historic center, and the historic center of Odessa. It has become evident that the UNESCO Secretariat is biased in terms of the situation in Ukraine. Representatives and bureaucrats of this organization refuse to see the lawlessness in this country. Let me remind you that the memorials to the founder of Odessa, Catherine the Great, as well as Field Marshal Suvorov, have been dismantled, demolished by the Kiev regime, but Zelensky kept silence. Following this barbaric act, he commenced policies to conserve the heritage of Odessa, but it's nothing without those memorials. Maybe it was a connivance between the Secretariat of UNESCO and the Kiev regime. They said, well, just demolish these monuments under cover of night, which are directly connected with real founders of Odessa. Well, following that, I presume they said so in UNESCO Secretariat, we will codify this status without those monuments, and we will preserve that under the aegis of UNESCO. Draft decisions on these properties have been published on the official UNESCO web portal. They are framed in a politicized nature, and it has nothing to do with culture or history whatsoever. The committee is proposed to voice regret of the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine, as they formulated, and a serious concern with regard to the detriment that was inflicted upon the Cathedral of Sofia during the attack on Kiev on June 10, 2025. Haven't they noticed anything else at the UNESCO Secretariat? Have they noticed that churches that were burned down, the plundered monasteries, have they not noticed persecution of representatives of Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine? Have they not noticed what they have done to the church and to the monuments of great figures that do not separate between Russia and Ukraine? They declared war on them. Haven't they noticed all of those acts? Such wording runs counter to the practice that has been established in the committee to not cite the sides of the conflicts. Decisions on the countries that are engaged in hostilities are taken as a rule with the wording voices concern with regard to the conflict that is taking place, because UNESCO is taking a different stance. If you want to talk about the countries, well, they should talk differently. They should should look at how Russia is preserving its cultural and historical properties on our new territories when they truly cherish all languages, of all ethnic groups. One should also look at the situation in Ukraine and compare these two situations, where they just beat the Russian language out of Ukrainians. That's where you would need to name the countries, but it has nothing to do with the mandate of the Convention concerning the Protection of the World Cultural and Natural Heritage of 1972, and exceeds the authorities of the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO as its governing body. It contravenes the provisions of the Declaration of Principles to promote international solidarity and cooperation to preserve world heritage. It was adopted in 1972 during the 23rd session of the UNESCO General Assembly. We're talking about the need to preserve impartiality and to base the decisions of the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, but the same abbreviation serves in the Russian language for the club of funny guys and girls. UNESCO, this committee should the decisions of the committee should be based on scientific notions and contribute to respectful dialogue and consensus. But it has all been, the Secretariat has been stripped of those things. Mr. Rutte, NATO Secretariat, NATO General Secretary. Let's look at recent statements of Mr. Rutte. He has voiced concerns regarding relations between Russia and China. They have stopped any learning and getting real educations. They just have fake documents and they're building their careers on Russophobia. But Rutte should know that neither Russia nor China is a part of his mandate. We're not part of this alliance. Rutte versus Russia and China, we don't have anything to do with Rutte. But we care for his words, because his words is just another testament that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, whose secretariat he is heading, continues to conceive of the world as an arena of geopolitical confrontations to maintain its slipping global dominance of the collective West. Multipolarity, alternative centers, and mainstream centers of power and development, equitable and mutually respectful relations between states, all these things just lack in the mentality of contemporary NATO representatives. As far as the military cooperation between Moscow and Beijing goes, I'd like to dwell on this in detail. It is a truly important component of the Russian-Chinese comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation in this new era. It contributes to ensuring security of our countries and to maintaining stability in key regions of the planet. When NATO representatives are talking about this so-called security that they should implement also through or via Ukraine, using Ukraine. But who was threatening you? Can you cite at least one document that was saying that somebody was threatening NATO? There are no statements like that. But when we are talking with the Chinese about our own security, we're talking about this knowing what we're talking about. We know the history. Because history shows that we have always been under attack. But we are using NATO documents, and our countries are cited there as potential adversaries of NATO. So I'd like to note the following. Our cooperation with China is implemented in strict compliance with the international law. It's absolutely transparent. It does not have a hidden agenda. It doesn't have anything to do with bloc and confrontation nature. It is not aimed against any third countries. We have close cooperation between the armed forces of Russia and China. It is based on deep trust. It has a special nature and unprecedentedly high level of interstate relations. It is not a union, but it exceeds the traditional nature of traditional alliance during the Cold War. That's why the notions of Secretary General Rutte that PRC's President Xi Jinping should or would call Russian President Vladimir Putin before attacking Taiwan, provokes our profound bewilderment and justified indignation. And of course, we are, wondering whether Mark Rutte is mentally healthy. Of course, we have concerns because of the mental state of General Secretary of NATO. What are we talking about? What kind of an attack if Taiwan is an integral part of China? Is that only our principal position? Not at all. This is our fundamental, unwavering position. As far as I know, all NATO countries recognize this fact. At the same time, they speculate on the admissibility of such manipulations. Verbal, linguistic, or mental manipulations. You name it. They constantly talk about Taiwan in separation from China. They speculate on the admissibility of violating the status quo between China mainland and Taiwan. They continue to sell arms to Taiwan, to deploy military trainers, and to test methods that have already been tested in Ukraine. Is it hypocrisy, double standards, or violation of international law? The idea to hold such talks between Russian and Chinese leaders reveals a deep misunderstanding of the essence of our strategic partnership on the part of NATO. Maybe they will stand aside from the statements of Rutte. Maybe, well, I don't know what will happen. That's a question to them. I'll remind you that Russia and China don't have any military bloc. We don't have any hierarchy. We preserve our sovereignty. We equitably and comprehensively cooperate. And we base our foreign policy decisions on our own nationals. Nobody has any vote there on, general issues. Neither do they have any vote on issues that are so important for them. I'd like to underline that Russian-Chinese cooperation in military and technical areas is based around exclusively positive and constructive agenda. Confrontation is not part of our philosophy. Brussels continues to convince itself that Russia is a threat and China is a...
Это там фобии, у нас конструктив. Вот откуда исходят настоящие риски военной эскалации, показывают итоги недавно завершившегося саммита НАТО, на котором страны-члены, напомню, единогласно утвердили навязанное Вашингтоном решение поднять уровень военных расходов с нынешних 2% ВВП до 5% их ВВП. При этом уже сейчас их совокупные траты на оборону составляют почти $1,5 триллиона. Это, просто напомню, больше половины всех мировых расходов на эти нужды. Рюте, как известно, внес существенный вклад в продавливание этого обязательства среди европейцев, чтобы порадовать того, кого он назвал папочкой. Откуда будут браться эти средства?
Now I would like to turn to the methods of imposing democracy and continues to be imposed where it is needed. Of the Russian Federation finally got a solution on the Yale University issue. This is not because this is not a desirable institution, but because it's a hostile one acting against our country. The name of the School of International Relations on the door is hiding the idea of not preparing the global leaders, but professional.
Выпускников наши любимые персонажи из так называемого фонда борьбы с коррупцией. Помните, да, он признан экстремистским и запрещен в Российской Федерации. Те самые, кто с таким усердием применял полученные в Еле знания для организации хорошо оплачиваемой протестной активности в России, просто звериными методами действуя. Не могу не сказать и о том, что это так называемый гуманитарный университет активно участвует в юридическом обосновании грабежа. Пытается, как они говорят, законно, а мы, конечно, понимаем, что незаконно, украсть российские активы, замороженные, как они формулируют, а на самом деле заблокированные Западом, чтобы потом переправить их на финансирование киевского террористического режима. То есть лицо прямое соучастие в гибридной войне против России и прямое покрывательство грабежа. И это после вот всего, если после
education as having dangerous results. The entry to the West is very difficult, if possible at all. And unlike this situation, Sweden colleagues can easily visit Russia, interview authorities, and show different events in our country, including large-scale events devoted to the 80th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War victory. Some Sweden journalists spread fake information that was ordered by the authorities on the increasing of nationalism and militarism in our country. Militarism, the term militarism, they use openly in NATO structures. They say that they should militarize their own economy, but this is for Sweden. Sweden is not worried about that. Sweden is worried about our country, and Sweden is trying to destroy relations with Russia. Interestingly, in the democratic country of Sweden, starting with September, the schools obliged the total defense subject in the education process and will show them the will teach them information on NATO, and devoted some pages of the history books to the NATO history of Sweden. Interestingly, the collaboration part will it be noted in some museum in Sweden. Not mentioning the need of Stockholm to assume the obligation to increase military spending up to 5% from the GDP. In this context, we would like to wish our colleagues working in Sweden media to look at our country without Russophobic ideas. To have an objective view on our country and not promote fake information. Speaking of fake information, you remember we spoke about foreign agents, and from the 1st July 2025, Britain introduced schemes on registration of foreigners. It was done together with the law of 2023, and Russia is included in the special control territory. What does it mean in practice? It means that all legal and physical institutions in Britain will need to notify local Ministry of Internal Affairs on achieving with the Russian state of an agreement, which means that they should report on the contacts with the Russian party. The contacts shall be informed. The information on the contacts shall be registered in Britain. What can it lead to? Take into account the humanitarian, the liberal ideas of Britain. You should think that they will give a fine or something else, but no, they will go further, and it will be punished with the sentence, with the criminal court. The taking decision on criminalization of the activity as an activity within the certain mechanism, it will be considered by the British Special Services, and any cooperation with the representatives of Russia, with British citizens, organizations, or Russian citizens, or those who live in Russia, is an area of risk for British people. We are not talking about the political activity only, we are talking about any activity starting with the cultural and humanitarian projects and finishing with the protocols, sport, educational activities. Once again, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the legal basis is not clear on this case. Nobody knows what are the consequences. Everything depends on how these contacts will be interpreted by the local British law enforcement agencies. And this, as you know, the interpretation opens unlimited field for violation for different types of violations. The idea supported by London of the Russian threat, even before the special military operation, the British people started spinning Russian hysteria, regularly introducing Russophobic provocations in the media space, like Skripal case, covering this with the preservation of the national security, and by this they actually control their own population in Britain. The authorities of Great Britain show Russia as an enemy in Britain to find justification of the hybrid aggression against our country for further filling Ukraine with weapons for attacks through their proxies and under foreign flags, trying to destabilize political situation and undermine civil order and to inflict defeat on Russia. And they do this to resolve their own tasks, trying to explain their internal problems and their own errors by vicious actions of Moscow. The state of Britain is the state where the authorities have unlimited resources to control foreign and their own citizens, and they have a possibility to suppress rights and liberties of all people in an unlimited number, in an unlimited way. And the announcements of Britain, of British authorities criticizing Russia and other states outside the golden million. You remember that these countries, especially our country and our countries, this law was introduced in response to a similar one that was in effect in other countries and worked against our citizens. But it is our countries, our people, our authorities who develop reciprocal measures as a response were criticized. Now Britain wants to stay silent, unlike British laws. Russian laws demand to declare political activity in the interest of the Western states. And here, in Britain, under the activity of the British scheme, there are different types of activities, from humanitarian, educational, sporting, political, and so on.
It is surprising. This narrative is forgotten. Use this again and apply it to yourself. The nature of these new mechanisms show that the fears of the current British authorities, who are afraid of their own population and not even of Russia, it cannot be qualified otherwise by the violation of the human rights commitments of London. This will lead to total control over the actions of people in Great Britain and to limitless impunity. As to the influence of this decision to the Russia-British relations, what is remained of it, this is another discriminatory barrier that confirms the aspiration of London to do everything possible to prevent normalization of relations with our country, given that the operation of the scheme will concern our compatriots living in Great Britain. This scheme also resembles Matrix, given the fact that its activities will concern the Russian compatriots living in Great Britain. The Russian embassy in London published commentaries calling on to be cautious in cases that can be subject, can fall under this mechanism. On July the 1st, Denmark started its presidency in the Council of Europe under the motto "Strong Europe in the Changing World." There's an open conflict in Europe. It's a wound that cannot be healed, and it's only getting worse. It's bleeding out, and the Westerners and NATO members put more viruses and bacteria into this wound, but they want to make Europe stronger. They would like do it through total militarization. It's disastrous for European countries. This Ukrainian conflict is an existential meaning for them. This conflict should be settled, but they launched it. They shouldn't put more money and weapons to it. It begs the question. We have a map, the globe. Does anyone in Denmark can see that without Russia, Europe isn't considered to be Europe? How can they counter Russia if Russia is a part of the European continent? It means that they would like to oppose the European continent, but they cannot recognize that. The pretense for this policy is the unavoidable, as they say, Russian threat used by the Danish authorities and other EU political elites to distract attention of their public from growing social and economic problem. Subjugating of the dissenters. The expedited militarization will take place to the detriment of the European citizens. The consequences will be felt in the future, among the future generations, and it will mean that Western Europe lost their autonomy in the matter, and the EU is a part of NATO. And I'll remind you that the EU probably is a part of NATO, but NATO is managed by the Americans. It is the presidency will build up the aid to the neo-Nazi regime of Zelensky. It demonstrates lack of interest in peaceful political and diplomatic settlement of the Ukrainian conflict through removing its root causes. It provokes escalation of the conflict. They provoke the more victims and destruction, new military crimes against civilians and civil infrastructure. This alarmist military narrative, manipulation with the fear among the European population, and confrontation with Russia don't strengthen security in Europe. They only lead to more dividing lines on the continent. Security of Europe cannot be ensured without Russia. By a map to someone in Copenhagen attempts to circumvent Russia and to oppose our interests are futile. By the way, they have their own experts. They are crying out inside the EU, NATO space and try to draw attention not only to their own problems, but to the fact that they are expediting in this conflicts that they launched in Norway. It is not far from Denmark. A book of journalist Alf Jacobsen was published. It's called invisible energy war, from the killing of Kennedy to subversions on the Nord Streams. It features a number of proof that the West, led by the US, for several decades targetedly obstructed the development of the USSR and then Russia as a world energy power. The culmination of this destructive effort is the conflict in Ukraine and Nord Stream's explosions in September 2022. This terror attack against the Nord Streams was a planned operation funded from the by the Biden administration. The Western Europe and especially Germany was hurt by this. Based on certain facts, the book writes about the involvement of Norway into the subversions, and Russian oil and gas, I quote, played a decisive role in European well-being, end of quote. However, they are not grateful. Beneficial cooperation with Russia that has always supported and has always been a reliable supplier of energy to Europe fell victim to the ambitions of the politicians, simply because someone had political ambitions or some received bribes to organize this policy. I will tell you about the author of the book. It's quite an authoritative and well-known writer, Alf Jacobsen. He is well known because of his books about World War II. His books were published in Norwegian and English. I know that there will be Russian and Chinese translation available soon. The Western, if you would like to learn the opinion of people from the Western Europe, you can read this book. Now to one more fact of rewriting history. In May 25th, within the memorial events dedicated to the world, to the 80th anniversary of the victory in the World War II, in Herbert's house, there was a wreath-laying ceremony on the behalf of the ambassador of Russia to Germany as the General Consulate of Russia in Bonn and General Consul of Belarus in Munich. Several hours later, on the order of the management of this memorial complex, the ribbons with the national flags of Russia and Belarus were taken down. The prosecutor's office in Munich ruled that it was not a crime. But who can agree with this? What is this? What kind of new interpretation of the law from the Munich law enforcers, so to say? We cannot hope for them to be unbiased. But, however, they are obliged to know that there is a diplomatic immunity. It is applied to diplomatic and consulate representatives of foreign missions. They are infected with Russophobia, nationalism, and we always see nationalism against Belarusian people as well. And it's terrible for people who are in charge of the Dachau Memorial Complex. They are accomplices of abusing the world history. It was World War II, and the history of it is global. It's the world history. They're abusing the world history. We'll continue demanding the German authorities to bring to justice all those involved in this abuse of the state symbols of Russia. We call on Berlin to abandon the escalation and such a policy. There's good news from July 6 to 12. There's a anniversary international car ride between the cities of military glory of Russia and the Republic of Belarus. This event brings together of caring people in the Rostov region. The participants will visit the memorial complexes in Moscow, Rostov-on-Don, Tula, Kaluga, Smolensk, Vitebsk, Brest, Minsk, and other cities. A special attention will be given to the exhibition Diplomacy for the Sake of Peace. The culmination will take place on July 19th in Moscow and will feature a wreath-laying ceremony to the tomb of the unknown soldier in the Alexandrov Garden. The German ambassador, I imagine, a German ambassador comes to a memorial complex. The complex is dedicated to the memory of the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. For example, the Eternal Flame. And the ambassador of Germany or any other NATO country, as they usually have done and continue doing. They bring a wreath with ribbons in the colors of the national flag, because it is important for an ambassador. It's not a personal present or flower bouquet. They don't do it in their personal capacity, but they do it on the behalf of their country. And a NATO ambassador or a German ambassador put this wreath to the internal flame, to the tomb of the unknown soldier with the national symbols. They kneel after that, and they leave, and somebody come and take down the ribbons or other symbols. For example, some writings that are there. And this is a gesture of barbarism. Can you imagine something like that? So why don't you write about it in the German media? About how symbols of Russia and Belarus were taken down. These countries suffered huge losses in that war, and diplomatic representatives commemorated those victims. Why don't you write about it? Why don't you call on your compatriots at all levels to stop this frenzy that, first of all, will hit you and hurt you, but it will be too late. We continue following the international chess tournament. The first and second rounds were mentioned during our briefings of December 18th, 2024 and February 27th, 2025. On July 10th through 13th, Moscow will see the super final of this competition. This event will finalize a number of selective stages that took place from December 2024 to until June 2025. it will bring together more than 200 participants. This platform will unite the best young chess players from Russia and winners of the selective stages from countries of SCO and BRICS. There will be representatives from youth teams from Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Brazil, India, Kazakhstan, China, Uzbekistan, and other countries. Children from Kursk, Bryansk, Belgrade, Zaporozhye Oblast, and Donetsk People's Republic will also there. The ceremonies of inauguration and awarding ceremony of the winners will be participated by the representatives of the Council of Federation and the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation and a number of federal ministries. This tournament will be broadcast online and all the links will be available in the text of today's briefing. We invite chess players and media representatives to participate in this event. On July 12th, we celebrate the 65th anniversary one of the leading camps in Russia, the All Russia Child Center Orleanik. It was opened in 1960 on the shore of the Black Sea in the Krasnodar region. It became a forgery of talents, the place where the stars of future scientists, artists, athletes, and diplomats start their careers. The children who go there learn the most important things: the love for the motherland, mutual respect, friendship without borders. In 2025, the camp was given the status the UNESCO associated school. This defines the humanitarian and cultural function of the programs implemented in the center. But this is not it. It has unique educational programs. They hold festivals, sporting and cultural events. It maintains ties with other countries based on mutual respect, despite the unprecedented pressure on Russia from other countries. It is open for everyone. There is no unwillingness to interact with children only because of the country of origin. It has never been like this, never will be. The camp will have a lot of children every year from the countries, from the neighboring countries and from all regions of the Russian Federation. We're proud that this camp continues traditions based on good neighborly relations, mutual help, humanism. We are sure that the center will continue being like this. We congratulate the management and the teachers of this wonderful camp, Orleanik.
Еще одна важная дата, 17
June 17th, we celebrate 60 years of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between the Gambia and Russia. We're connected by friendly relations based on mutual respect and consideration of each other's interests. It's symbolic that it is 2025 that marks the opening of the Russian embassy in the Gambia. We hope that will give additional impetus to the development of bilateral ties in the current world. We hope that the foreign mission will help to step up mutual cooperation in different areas. Currently, Russia and the Gambia maintain a sustainable political dialogue. They coordinate their actions at the UN and other international platforms. Last year, let me remind you, a working visit was effected by Gambian foreign minister to Russia. Steps are being taken to expand bilateral cooperation in trade, economic and investment areas. And the Russian economic operators are aided in entering the Gambian market. The cooperation in personnel training is also rising. The quota allocated by the Russian state to the Gambia was increased until 15 places. We are convinced that by joint efforts we can ensure further progressive development of the whole complex of mutually beneficial Russian-Gambian ties to the benefit of both countries to ensure peace, security and stability on the African continent. Do we have International Life with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. How can you comment on Ukrainian activities to leave the Ottawa Convention on anti-personnel mines ban, taking into account especially that according to this treaty, the country party to the convention cannot leave the convention while it's still part of the conflict? Let me remind you that Russia is not part of this convention, just for you to understand. In accordance with the convention on the prohibition of the use, stockpiling, production and transfer of anti-personnel mines and on their destruction for the state that is party to this conflict and is engaged in an armed conflict, the decision on abandoning the convention only enters into force following the end of the aforementioned armed conflict. We believe that this provision can completely be applied to the process of abandoning the Ottawa Treaty. At the same time, the obligations under the conventions have not been followed by Kiev before the decision. According to the requirements, Ukraine had to, as early as 2010, destroy all its reserves of anti-personnel mines with exclusion of minimal quantity that is required to elaborate methods of revealing mines and train specialists, but Ukraine did not do so. The Kiev regime is using anti-personnel mines against civilians, and it has been recorded by Russian law enforcement agencies, and we're informing you on that. But the aforementioned violations of the Ottawa Treaty have not been properly assessed on the part of the convention parties, including during its 5th review conference that took part in Cambodia in November last year in Siem Reap. Some countries have been encouraged the Kiev regime to do that. Ukraine has not been adhering to its obligations under the convention. It only reaffirms our assessments of the weakness and reliability of its regime. The convention does not have any leverage to impact countries that evade compliance with its provisions. The decision of Kiev to abandon the convention followed similar steps taken by Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, goes in line with the policies of the collective West and its satellites to revise and undermine international legal system in arms control area, in disarmament and non-proliferation. They are even more loud about their own security, but they're requiring others to follow the line of international legal requirements. They make up non-existent accusations. But look at them. They just follow their own judgment and they base that on their own wishes. It's more than that. They make up myths and propagate fakes, and the consequences will escalate the situation on the European continent even further. And Brussels cares so much about that, but only in words, not in deed. It will further degrade the situation in regional and global security. Thank you very much. Do we have Russia Today with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Can you comment on Alexander Stubb's statement on the ability of Russians to sustain injuries and pain? I can only second these words, but not in my personal capacity. But I want to do that based on the quote from the text that we often hear. Alexander Suvorov is being quoted very frequently. Here's a quote that I'd like to give you in full. Not a concise version, not one sentence, but I'd like to give you the whole quote that reflects his philosophy. It's in the canteen of a convent dedicated to Saint Joseph during the fall of 1999. It is contained in the Prince Bagration's speech, but it was reflected in the book of a colonel, Mr. Starkov, who was part of the military combat mission. 1748. Accounts of an old soldier, part of Suvorov's army. The book was published in Moscow by the Moskvitanian publishing house. Nobody doubted this information. Ever. Alexander Suvorov said the following, and I directly quote him, on the basis of Bagration's notes. To go back is a shame. That would mean to retrieve. Russians and I have never retreated. Mountains are around us. We are in the mountains. We will be encircled by a strong enemy who would be proud of their victory. Peter, even as early as Peter the Great was in power, the Russian troops were never in that dire position as we are now. We have always emerged victorious, and the glory of Russia has been shining for over 80 years, represented by its banners. And this glory was everywhere, from the east to the west, and the enemy was afraid of Russia, and the protection was given to Russia by its allies. But Peter the Great was one of the greatest czars who ever lived. Peter I was wronged by Austria. The governor it's a betrayal. They have shed a lot of blood. We cannot expect any help from anyone. We only have hope for God and for our great bravery and for self-serving attitude of our troops led by you. Only this is what we have. We are on the brink of a precipice. We are Russians and God is with us. If only Suvorov knew that he was giving this fundamental speech a couple of years, couple of months, I would say, couple of days before he emerged glorious. But 145 years before we emerged victorious in the Great Patriotic War. But then we were liberating Austria once again. Who would have thought that 100 years later, the history repeats itself? We see again an act of betrayal on the part of those who we had liberated, given our lives for their liberation. So Stub is correct in saying his words. It's part of our history. It's part of our blood. It's part of our life philosophy, in our faith, and of course of our future. Thank you. We have Izvestia with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions. Donald Trump said that countries that support BRICS policies will be subject to additional trade tariffs, 10% tariffs. What's the stance of Russia to protect its interests in the light of possible economic sanctions? You said you had two questions. I only have one. It's the previous administration that the blame should be put on. Why should others bear responsibility for their actions? We see what American economy is like now, to what level it was brought. Liberal Democrats in the U.S. mocked common sense, their own economy, their own people. So why should the whole world pay for those things? Why shouldn't we ask Obama or Biden a couple of, percent from their pensions, from their profits, to cover damage and costs? We see what the situation is like now in the United States, and President Trump wants to revive the country to make it great again. Why should other peoples pay for these mistakes? Those peoples were exploited for centuries, and now they're still indebted, allegedly, to the West. I don't think this question should remain a rhetorical one. I think a concrete answer should be given to it. We carefully follow the U.S. sanctions in their trade policies, including the imposition of new duties with regard to a number of countries, including our partners within BRICS. This rhetoric reaffirms once again that the U.S. continues to use trade and economic tools, be that illegitimate sanctions or be that tariffs, whatever, as an element of political pressure, hiding behind slogans about fair competition and national security. Of course, we are forced to posit, regrettably, that this line leads to the destruction of the architecture of international economic cooperation, flagrantly violate WTO rules, and Washington, as very recently was insisting on the universal truth, the WTO as a universal truth, but it does not serve the interest of the United States. They should increase their competitive edge from within. They should seek internal reserves to overcome their crisis instead of solving their problems at the expense of others. Radical and unjustified increase in customs duties by the largest economy in the world undoubtedly carries huge risks for the global economy, and their consequences will be perceived by all countries. The global inflation will grow as the result of restructuring supply chains and altering trade flow geography. You will see structural imbalances and a decline in labor productivity, increased volatility on financial and energy markets. Ultimately, this will lead the world to a global recession. In Rio de Janeiro, BRICS summit just concluded, and all member states of these associations stand in solidarity in their assessments, and they have voiced concerns with regard to the increased tariff and non-tariff measures. As far as the consequence for Russia goes, we have been living in the conditions of restrictions, barriers, and sanctions regimes, illegitimate sanctions. It has now turned into a trade war against Russia. In this regard, we have a unique expertise of adapting and sustainably developing. Against this external pressure, Russia will continue to strengthen its economic sovereignty and step up its cooperation with states which are aiming their policies at rational approach and sound pragmatism, and of course at respecting international law and international law. Ukraine, according to Bild, is asking for billions of arms. They asked for thousands of guided missiles, for mid-range IRIS-T SLMN missiles, and 500 guided missiles for IRIS-T SLS, and 200,000 munitions for